Thank you all for joining the August 2024 VMware by Broadcom TAM customer webinar. Our goal remains to deliver content that will continually bring more value from your VMware by Broadcom investment, and today's webinar is sure to accomplish this. Before we get into that content, though, there's just a couple of basic announcements I want to make. The first being that our next TAM customer webinar will be on September 15th, and we'll be having a What's New session, very similar to today's, but with the focus being on ARIA Operations 8.18. This version brings some valuable new features that you'll certainly want to know about. Please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. And if there are any questions that go unanswered during the webinar today, then please do reach out to your TAM and they can help you get those answered. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value you receive from this session and also any topic suggestions for future sessions. We'd greatly appreciate you taking just the 2 minutes to help us with that information. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and your TAM can make that recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording does go publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel where you can watch it without knowing the private link. And so that does bring us to today's speaker and topic. Feidhlim O'Leary has helped us learn of new features in vSphere before, and we're grateful to have him back today to make sure that we know of all the goodness that's packed into 8.0 Update 3. And so I want to turn it over to him. Feidhlim.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome everybody. It's great to be back again for another What's New in vSphere session. So like Andy just mentioned, we're going to talk about vSphere 8 Update 3. We're going to give you a pretty in-depth overview of almost everything that's in the release. There's obviously always going to be some small little things that you can read about in the release notes, but this will give you a very, very good overview of what's in this latest update release for vSphere. My name is Feidhlim O'Leary, and I'm a product marketing engineer here at VMware by Broadcom. So this is going to be our agenda. We're going to talk about vSphere IaaS control plane, and that's the new name for vSphere with Tanzu. So just want to make that clear right out the gate. We've had vSphere with Tanzu, that Kubernetes platform, that kind of DevOps platform and experience for a couple of releases now. So we've just decided to essentially rebrand that, rename that to vSphere IaaS control plane. We'll talk about what's new in lifecycle management, and there's a really huge piece there in live patching, being able to live patch your ESXi hosts. We look at some new hardware support that vSphere is introducing, some new CPU technologies, some new memory technologies. vSphere with GPUs, always a big important one nowadays for the AI/ML workloads and those hardware accelerated workloads. And we look at some smaller pieces then in the areas of availability, things that enhance our guest OS and workloads, and some security. Now, just a reminder before we dive in is about where we are in the vSphere release lifecycle. So vSphere 8 obviously shipped there in October of 2022, and we've had update 1, we've had update 2, and we recently dropped vSphere 8 update 3. And if you're familiar with our vSphere releases, this is typically the last major update to a vSphere release. And it's always important to have in the back of your mind, if you are still on the previous version of vSphere, that vSphere 7 will go end of general support in October of next year. That date was originally April, and we decided to extend it by 6 months to give customers additional flexibility and additional time to perform those upgrades to vSphere 8 or those migrations. Maybe you need to procure new hardware that may not be supported on vSphere 8, stuff like that. So we're giving you an extra 6 months of a buffer time there. But obviously, we don't like to see customers leave it too long. We want customers to always run supported versions of vSphere. And just another reminder is around some features and technologies that we've removed in vSphere 8 and some that we've announced as deprecated in vSphere 8. So the column on the right are stuff that is no longer present in vSphere 8, things that you may or may not be using today in vSphere 7 or vSphere 6. Typically, this is I/O devices and CPUs, maybe some really, really old guest OSs, things like that. Now, the deprecation side is one that's probably more relevant to today's audience. These are things that we are going to stop supporting in the future. So a deprecation, when we announce a deprecation, it means that this is typically going to be the last release, major release, that a feature is going to be available in. And one of the larger ones around those are things like update manager baselines. Even though we announced that deprecation in vSphere 7, we kept it in vSphere 8, we really want people to move to that image-based model. We did announce 2 additional new deprecations with vSphere 8 Update 3, and that is vSphere Trust Authority and some areas of SDRS and SIOC. So there are some technologies around storage DRS and storage IO control that pertain to the metrics of IO latency. And if you check on core.vmware.com, and I can share the link with Andy and he can send it out to you as well, we do have a blog post that outlines just exactly what is deprecated in that space. And it's noted in the release notes as well. So it's always good to have a look at those release notes for those updates, just to make sure that there's nothing there that is going to catch you off guard. Okay, so let's dive into it. The first topic we're going to talk about, as I said, is vSphere IaaS control plane. This is infrastructure as a service, formerly known as vSphere with Tanzu, and it's all about making Kubernetes easier to run and deliver a self-service DevOps experience. Now, one of the biggest things we've done with vSphere 8 Update 3 is we've decoupled the TKG service from vCenter. This is important because in the past, to deliver new TKG releases, Tanzu Kubernetes Grid releases, we had to initially use vCenter as the release vehicle. We had to patch vCenter, patch our supervisor cluster, and then we get access to new TKG capabilities and support for new Kubernetes versions. That obviously didn't gel well with the extremely fast release cadence that the Kubernetes community has. They release new versions, they deprecate old versions far, far quicker than the vSphere release cadence. So we made the decision to decouple the TKG service from vCenter, and it's implemented now as what's called a supervisor service. This allows us to deliver asynchronous releases of the service and help us align with the upstream Kubernetes and ship new Kubernetes versions faster than ever before. And we actually saw this benefit really recently when we were able to almost support new Kubernetes versions within a couple of days of their upstream releases. In the past, we would trail weeks, sometimes even months behind the community. So this was obviously a win for us to be able to keep on top of that really high speed release cadence. You'll be able to update the supervisor service or the TKG supervisor service independently of vCenter. So you no longer need to rely on vCenter to be that release vehicle. And I do see that there are some questions coming in. I'll stop at the end of each section and I'll pause and I'll go through some of those questions as they pertain to the section itself. Now, one of the other features we've released for the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid clusters is auto-scaling, being very easily to enable an auto-scaler to scale up your Kubernetes workloads, your Kubernetes worker nodes when demand requires it, and automatically scale them back down when that demand might diminish. It's available as a standard package. You install it using kubectl or Tanzu CLI. And it just does have a minimum Kubernetes version of 1.25. This allows for an out-of-the-box experience for cluster auto-scaling integrated with the Tanzu Kubernetes service. We had a lot of requests to support Tanzu Kubernetes Grid and supervisor clusters across stretched vSAN clusters. This is quite a common topology, and increasingly more common topology. from an availability perspective as well, a stretched vSAN cluster spanning 2 physical sites. So we have made we've done the testing, we've done the validation, and we can support this configuration now in conjunction with our Kubernetes clusters. Customers can now deploy their Tanzu Kubernetes grid instances and spread their worker nodes across their 2 sites, their 2 vSAN stretched sites. We still do recommend leaving the control plane nodes right now together, co-located, just because of how etcd works and uses a quorum-based mechanism. But for the worker nodes, which is where the actual application would be serviced from, you can spread those across your 2 vSAN sites. You can use host affinity rules as well to achieve this, to spread the worker nodes across and make sure that you don't end up in a scenario where all your worker nodes end up on one physical site. We've brought automated certificate rotation to the control plane, to the supervisor control plane for this platform. Now we have automatic certificate rotation in the TKGs themselves and the Tanzu Kubernetes grid instances themselves, but we have to bring it to the control plane portion as well. This is important not just from vSphere IaaS perspective, but just in general. The industry is moving to certificates that have shorter and shorter validity periods. I think we're down to pretty much 365 days now as being the standard. And the CA Browser Forum is implementing these standards, and browsers potentially will start adopting policies that they won't accept connecting to an endpoint that has a larger validity period. So having auto renewal for certificates is becoming more important. When you have a certificate that's about to expire, I think the threshold is 30 days, you'll see an alert in vCenter. There'll be an auto renew that will kick off. That auto renew attempt will if it works, great, nothing for you to do. If there is a failure in that auto renewal for whatever reason, you'll see an alarm. The attempt will try again every 12 hours. If it still fails, we still do have the manual process to inject a new certificate into the supervisor. But we're pretty confident that with the process that we've implemented here, auto renewal will just seamlessly happen every time the certificates are about to expire. Now, this may be something that you may need to manage yourself if you're using your own internal or public CA signed certificates. The auto renewal will take place from the default VMCA instance. Now, the vSphere IaaS platform is not just for deploying and managing Kubernetes clusters. It's also able to provide DevOps users and consumers of that platform to deploy virtual machines. And when we initially released the VM service, we had this concept of a VM class. And that was almost a t-shirt size of a VM size. We had small, medium, large, 2 CPUs, 4 CPUs, 8 gigs of memory, 16 gigs of memory. It was very kind of off the shelf, and there wasn't a lot of customization. And we've slowly been adding more customization to that. And with vSphere 8 Update 3, you now can essentially configure a VM class to have any virtual machine hardware configuration that we have in vSphere today. There's no difference between a traditional virtual machine template and defining different hardware, NICs, storage controllers, GPUs, PCIe devices. You can define those in a VM class. And the administrators have the control to then expose only the VM classes that they want to expose to the consumers of the platform. So you still have that full control over what resources can be consumed by the DevOps users or by the consumers of the platform. So it doesn't run a risk that somebody who's got access to a namespace is deploying some virtual machines, that they can deploy a VM with, a terabyte of memory and just consume every possible resource you have. You have the full control over defining the VM classes and providing the VM classes to the users. Now, we have a concept in ARIA automation called the cloud consumption interface. This is a UI in ARIA automation that integrates with vSphere and can be used by users to create VMs, TKG clusters, load balancers, persistent volume claims, all those types of objects that go with Kubernetes clusters on this platform. We're bringing some of that user interface directly into vCenter. We're calling it the local consumption interface. This is can be available for each individual namespace. So each namespace owner can actually customize this user interface to fit their needs. And it's delivered as one of those supervisor services that I mentioned earlier, which will allow us to release new updates to this user interface asynchronously. It'll automatically plug into the vSphere client, and you'll have a new portion of user interface for those consumers to use. It supports things like creating VMs, TKG clusters, saving all these specs as YAML, deploying load balancers, persistent volumes, even deploying virtual machines and workloads with GPU configurations if that hardware exists in the environment. Okay, so I'll just take a pause there and I'll just have a quick scan of the Q&A and see if there's any questions I can answer live. So we do have a question about NSX and LCM image-based is not fully compatible and that we're to stick with baselines. I'm not sure I agree with that initial statement because we did ship NSX and VLCM or NSX and LCM image-based support back in the vSphere 7. And if there's some gap happening, I'm not aware of it, but that integration should be well finished by now, definitely on vSphere 8. And we're seeing VCF default to using image-based clusters and moving away from the baseline mode, especially in VCF 5.2. So maybe there's some other issue happening there, but that integration should be complete and working. There's a question about the vSAN stretch cluster, about the control planes. Would they get restarted on, let's say, the opposite site in the case of a failure? So yes, that would come into play with normal vSAN stretch cluster site failover and fault domains. The control planes would get restarted depending on the rules that you have in place. And a question on the certificate auto renew. I believe it starts to try and auto renew at the 30-day mark. I think that might also be configurable as well. I can try and double check and see if I can get some more specifics to you. But our default is usually in vCenter as well. It's usually we'll alert at 30 days and it's typically configurable. And there's just two more questions. SDK support removed from 8 update 3. I'm not aware of any support removal, especially around SDK. As far as I know, the status quo remains around SDK support. I'm not directly involved with the SDK support teams, so you might have to reach out to maybe your account team or your TAM to follow up on that. And how would you compare VM class with ARIA automation? I guess there are similarities. The VM class is specifically for the VM service for the Kubernetes platform, whereas ARIA automation can use their templates or their blueprints to deploy traditional virtual machines outside of the IaaS platform. Whereas the VM class, you can't use the VM class construct outside of the vSphere IaaS platform. Okay, so we'll move on now to lifecycle management, and I have a demo as well here to show you as well, which hopefully will be of interest. So when we talk about lifecycle in vSphere, we're talking about typically three main areas: vCenter patching, and with that we've got vCenter reduced downtime update, which if you're not familiar with, we ship that in vCenter 8 update 1, allows us to patch vCenter using a migration-based approach, and it gives us a downtime of less than 5 minutes. We have configuration profiles, which again, we initially shipped with vSphere 8. And this is our new way of doing configuration management. It's not, I don't like to call it a replacement for host profiles because we haven't made such an announcement yet, but it's a cluster-based approach. It's using a desired state model rather than the attaching a profile like host profiles to individual hosts or individual clusters. If you haven't been able to use that because you're still running on baselines, you can now use vSphere configuration profiles with baselines in 8 update 3. We removed that limitation. And vSphere Lifecycle Manager is where we do everything for the clusters and the ESXi hosts themselves. It's declarative cluster image lifecycle. We can patch the firmware. We've got vendor integrations. There's some work that we're going to be doing there in the future to make that more flexible around heterogeneous clusters. But we have live patch, which is going to be huge, and it's only going to get better. We'll talk about that in a moment. There's some enhanced image customization, being able to remove bits, being able to retain older drivers should you require them, things like that. And for those that are using DPUs, we have dual DPU support as well. So let's jump into live patch. So with live patch, as the name suggests, we are able to patch an ESXi host without evacuating the host from VMs. So how does that work? And there are some limitations, there are some caveats. This is a first iteration of this feature, so there are going to be some things to call out. The first thing that happens is that the host will enter what's called partial maintenance mode. With partial maintenance mode, the VMs stay where they are. They don't migrate off the host, they don't power down, they don't suspend, they stay running exactly as they were. Now, when we're patching using live patch, we're patching a subset of ESXi initially. We're patching a subset of ESXi that handles the VM execution environment and a couple of processes and a couple of files, right? It's not the entire ESXi host itself that is live patch capable at this time. So what we do is we mount, essentially clone a new revision of those files and those processes that we want to patch. We stand them up in parallel. So we've got the purple one on the left, which is our clone one that we just created. We do a patch of that new mount revision. So we patch the files, we patch the processes. We still have both running in parallel, essentially. We've got 2 instances of the virtual machine execution environment running in parallel. Our VMs are still using the old version. They're still using the one on the right. So how do we make the VMs move over to use the new patched components? That's when the VMs go through what's called a fast suspend resume. Now, fast suspend resume isn't anything new. Fast suspend resume has been around for, I want to say, as far back as vSphere 6, maybe even as far back as 5. Anytime that you do a reconfiguration of a running virtual machine, add a NIC, add a disk, hot add memory or CPU if you've got that enabled, any live configuration to a running virtual machine, that goes through a fast suspend resume today. It's a non-disruptive operation. There are only a couple of VM types that are not compatible with fast suspend resume, and these are typically VMs that are configured with vSphere fault tolerance, VMs that are configured with PCI pass-through devices, and vSphere native pods from the vSphere Tanz or the vSphere IaaS platform, because they're not really truly VMs. They're containerized workloads. So the VMs will go through this fast suspend resume. Again, it's a non-disruptive operation, and now they're consuming the new patched instance of ESXi. And it's as simple as that. And I'll go through a couple of demos with you so that you can see it a kind of side by side. And also we'll click through and show what the UI looks like. It's a checkbox. Now, just a note on partial maintenance mode. That's what it would look like in the user interface. It's not a state that you can manually right-click and enter a host into. Only vSphere Lifecycle Manager can go through and enter the host into partial maintenance mode during a remediation event. You do, however, have the option to manually exit partial maintenance mode. The reason for that is it's essentially a troubleshooting option. If for whatever reason a host had entered partial maintenance mode and we had an outage, maybe the host crashed or vCenter crashed or something, catastrophic happened, we don't want the host to be stuck in partial maintenance mode. So we give you the option to manually exit it. Now, partial maintenance mode is almost like a quarantined mode where VMs continue to run, but it disallows any new VMs migrating to the host. It disallows new VMs to be created on the host. It maintains the current status quo. So if you've got 10 VMs on that host, those 10 VMs are staying on that host while it's in partial maintenance mode. We're not going to be able to move any VMs in or out. Now, there's some important information around live patch eligibility, right? Not every patch that we release moving forward is going to be live patch capable. Like I said, we can currently live patch a subset of ESXi that's involved in the VM execution environment. We guesstimate that roughly targets approximately 40% of where previous patches have hit or have been needed to hit for security vulnerability fixes and things like that. Our goal in the future is to obviously expand the footprint, the live patch eligibility footprint, to as much of ESXi as possible. We can't guarantee that we will ever hit 100% of patches will be live patch eligible, just because of what the system is in terms of a hypervisor. We may not be able to live patch absolutely every patch and update in the future. Now, with that in mind, when you do have a new patch that is released, and this is just an example screenshot, I know there isn't an ESXi 8 U3A released at this time. These build numbers are made up. They're not actual real build numbers at all. When we do release a new patch and it is live patch eligible, the UI will explicitly state that. I believe the release notes will state it as well. You'll see the icon with that little lightning bolt in the depot. And when you select the new version in the dropdown of your cluster image, you'll also see it as well. But it'll also tell you it's live patch eligible from, and that's important because if we take this example on screen, we've got 8.0 U3A, and it's telling us it's live patch eligible from 8.0 U3, and then that build number ending in 3650. We have to have our cluster, we have to have our hosts on that build number ending in 3650 to be able to live patch. If we're still on update 1, if we're still on update 2, if we're still on a different build of ESXi, we cannot live patch. We have to make sure that the source that we're currently running is eligible to live patch to the destination. And the UI and the product won't let you live patch if you don't meet those requirements. So that's important takeaway as well. We expect that at most, you'll be able to live patch in an N-2 sort of scenario. So for example, again, if we're currently running 8.0U3 and 8.0U3A releases, we don't patch. 8.0U3B releases, we don't patch. And then 8.0U3C releases, there's a chance we might be able to live patch, but there's also a chance that to live patch to that, we would have to be on 8.0U3B. We may have to be on the N-1 version as well. So to get the most out of live patch, it really does encourage you to maintain the latest patch build that's currently available. You'll get the most benefit out of live patch and being able to live patch continuously if you continuously maintain that latest build that is available. Now, I'm just going to switch to a demo here. Let me go back to that. Okay. Now, I know this is a little bit small, but you don't need to be able to read the text or read the screen. Essentially, what we have on the left is we're doing a non-live patch. On the right, we're doing a live patch. The clusters, this is in my lab, the clusters are identical. 4-node clusters, they've got the same amount of memory, CPU, storage, the same number of VMs running on them. They're essentially identical. So we kick off the remediation on both clusters pretty much at the same time. I do speed up the video because no one wants to sit and wait. But we can see the cluster on the right. We've entered partial maintenance mode on host 1, and there's no vMotion events happening. We can see that in the recent tasks below. There's no migrating VMs. But on the left, we're still waiting for that first host to enter maintenance mode, it just did, because we have to wait for those VMs to evacuate. Now, if we just let this run for a couple of moments, we can see that the cluster on the right, it's already on to its third host. It's 2 completed, it's on to the third host, and the first host is, the first cluster on the left is still kind of spinning its wheels for the second host. So you can really kind of see, even though I do have this sped up, this is a realistic representation of how fast live patch is compared to traditional patching. Now we can see the cluster on the right now is complete, and the cluster on the left still has 3 more hosts to do. Now, we don't need to watch, another couple of minutes of the cluster going through. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how quickly live patch can help you remediate your clusters. Now, there's just a little bit of a click-through demo that I wanted to share as well, just to show you how this looks like in the UI and what's the workflow going to be like. It's going to be very similar. So again, I'm running ESXi8 update 3. First thing I want to do is actually opt into live patch. It's not active out of the box. It is one of those remediation settings that we need to opt into. We can edit this at a cluster level, or we can edit it at the global level as well. I'm just doing it at the cluster level here. And this is the checkbox, enforce live patch. Click save. And we're assuming that there's a new patch available. Again, I've just got a dummy patch here for the case of this demo. And we can see it's live patch capable. And it tells me live patch eligible from 8.0U3 and that particular build, which is the build that I'm currently running. We can click save. The usual HCL compatibility checks, because this is a vSAN cluster, will kick off. And we'll see some information here. The host will be placed into partial maintenance mode before remediation. The host is eligible for live patch. So it'll give you that information out of the box. Remediation is exactly as it would be. And again, this does speed up a little bit just to save time for the demo. I'll get to some of those questions in the chat now momentarily as well. So we can see the host has entered partial maintenance mode. It tells us, I know that was quick, but it tells us about the VMs on the host and that they're going to go through a fast suspend resume. There's kind of pre-patching and post-patching scripts that occur as well. It's all highlighted in the, if we now I can't click this demo further. If we were to hit the see more, you'd be able to see more information about all the individual tasks. The important takeaway is that there's no VMs migrating. The VMs aren't leaving the host, they're staying in place, they're going through their fast suspend resume, and it's non-disruptive to those virtual machines. And I even have some vGPU enabled VMs as well. So it does work with vGPU enabled VMs. They're slightly different to PCI pass-through because they use a special virtualized GPU technology with NVIDIA. It does work with encrypted virtual machines as well. Like I said, the only VMs currently that do not support it are things like fault-tolerant VMs that are using PCI pass-through devices like Direct Path IO or vSphere native pods. Okay, so let me jump back here to the, lose my place. There we go. Okay, so let me just quickly scrub through some of the questions there because there's a lot on live patch. And I'll come back to the other lifecycle questions in a moment. So partial maintenance mode, yes, it is a feature of vSphere 8 Update 3. Everything we're talking about here in terms of live patch is only available in vSphere 8 Update 3. Is there a limit to the number of hosts in the cluster that can run live patch simultaneously? Currently, live patching is only done on a 1-by-1. It's a serial operation. We don't support parallel live patching at this time, but that's something that we are working on. Is there a limit to how many live patches you can do before you would have to reboot the host? That's a good question. I'm not sure I have an exact answer for that one, to be honest. As far as I know, as long as every subsequent patch is live patch capable, there's no limit. But the chances are, just because of the nature of ESXi, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to live patch indefinitely without hitting a patch that does require a full reboot. But I'll check that one out because that is an interesting question. It'll become more important as we increase the surface area that is live patch capable. Okay, I know there's more questions coming in. Live patching only work with image managed clusters. Yes, live patching does only work with the image managed clusters. If you're using baselines, sorry, you won't be able to use live patching. Is live patch planned for vCenter? I suppose the concept is likely on a post-it note somewhere in a PM's office. With the reduced downtime update, we've gotten our downtime to less than 5 minutes. And I know that we're working on reducing that down even more. So I guess the answer is, in a way, yes, a form of non-disruptive patching for vCenter is planned. Okay, there's a lot of questions coming in here. If a VM is not supported for live patch, is the host skipped for the updates? That's also a good question. The answer to that is no. So if you do have a VM, let's say you have a fault-tolerant VM on the cluster, fault-tolerant VMs on the cluster, the host itself will still be live patched. But after the patching event has finished, the compliance check, at the end, the compliance check will actually tell you that, okay, we've finished live patching, but these virtual machines have not been remediated. They have not been fast suspend resumed. So you would have to manually either vMotion those VMs, because that'll count as a fast suspend resume, or power cycle the VMs if you can. But vMotioning is typically the simplest one to do. So you would have to manually remediate those individual virtual machines. Okay. Is live patch available to VCF? Yes. My colleague Eric Gray, I believe, has some content out there that live patching is there in VCF in 5.2. Does the VM hardware version come into play? Absolutely not at all. We don't care about the virtual machine hardware when it comes to live patch eligibility. It's completely transparent. And will live patch support hosts with NVIDIA Grid? It should, because, well, let me preface it this way. If the patch that we're applying is not updating anything in NVIDIA Grid, then I don't see any reason why, because we do support live patching of hosts that are running vGPU VMs that is using the NVIDIA Grid technology, the NVIDIA GPUs under the hood. So as long as I suppose the question is probably live patch will not support live patching the NVIDIA component of ESXi at this point in time. That's something we may have to work with NVIDIA on. There's still, okay. Okay, let me just go through the rest of the lifecycle section, because I know there's still a lot of questions coming in, and then I'll come back to those. Okay, so we've talked about live patch. There's a huge amount of interest based on the Q&A, which is fantastic. We also have some customization to our vSphere Lifecycle Manager images themselves. In particularly, we're able to remove some components. This is actually quite an important thing. It sounds counterintuitive, but for edge use cases, this becomes more important, or for remote clusters, remote hosts that might not be on the best link between vCenter and ESXi. We want to reduce the overall payload of the image. So we can remove some of the inbox ESXi components that are unneeded for day-to-day use. Things like the ESXi VMware Tools VIB. That's quite a large VIB. That's one of the largest VIBs in the image. We can remove the host client. This was requested from a security perspective as well. Customers wanted to be able to disable the host client, disable that endpoint on their ESXi hosts as a potential attack vector. We can remove the VIB entirely, completely remove the host client from your ESXi hosts. That means you only have manageability through vCenter or manageability through the DCOI or SSH. And vendors are on board with this as well, being allowed to remove some unnecessary components or components that they may not be needed for their particular installation. So for example, here we've got some Dell, a Dell add-on, and it's allowing us to remove some Dell customizations as well. It typically won't allow us to remove anything that is actually needed, any drivers that are actually needed by the hardware, but more of the value add or the nice to have components of the image. We should be able to remove those and reduce the overall size of the image down significantly. Now, what's not pictured here as well is we also will have the ability to retain existing drivers. So opting to not update to a newer driver of a vendor add-on bundle. So if we take an example of we're running a Dell add-on here, it's for 8.0U2. Let's say we upgrade to 8.0U3, there's a new Dell add-on for 8.0U3. We might not want to actually update the driver for our NICs, for example. Maybe there's an incompatibility with the firmware of the NIC that we're currently running, or there might be other reasons why we might not want to update a particular driver. So vendor add-ons are going to allow us that customization to opt out of updating to the latest drivers in their newer bundles. But we would advise that you discuss this with the hardware vendors and really only opt out of adopting newer drivers if there's a valid reason to do so. Now, something quick, we have DPUs in vSphere 8. They're leveraged by NSX for network offload capabilities. vSphere Lifecycle Manager can patch the DPU instances. we now brought dual DPU support in vSphere 8 Update 3. So vSphere Lifecycle Manager can patch 2 DPUs. It's no different. Live patching isn't supported on DPU systems because there's an instance of ESXi on the DPU itself. We do need to go through that full evacuation and reboot cycle. And a little update to vCenter Reduce Downtime Update. Again, this was introduced in 8 Update 1, allows us to use a migration-based approach to patch or update vCenters with minimal downtime. It was initially only supported for self-managed vCenters, but we've expanded that now to the entire topology. So non-self-managed is included, enhanced link mode, and vCenter HA. Now, one of the actual interesting things about Reduced Downtime Update is you don't actually have to get to 8.0U3 or 8.0U2 whenever first released. You don't have to get to that version first. As long as you're on any version of vCenter 8, be it the initial release, Update 1, Update 2, or any of the patches in between, you can use Reduced Downtime Update to upgrade to 8 Update 3. So you don't have to get to 8.0U3 first and then use it moving forward. You can actually use it to get to 8 Update 3. We've given the option for an automated switchover phase as well in Reduced Downtime Update. This is the phase of downtime. So when the new vCenter is deployed, all the data is replicated across. We continuously monitor and continuously replicate that data until we hit that switchover phase. That's when we switch over, we shut down the old vCenter, we start up the new vCenter. Everything is as it was before, but we're just updated. You still have that manual switchover phase to control that, or you can choose an automatic switchover so that it'll automatically fix over once it's ready. So I'm just giving you an additional option there. Okay, so let's pause again here and just go through some of these more lifecycle questions. I'll scroll back up here because I know there's a couple from a little while ago. Do configuration profiles work with auto deploy? They do. As far as I know, they do work with auto deploy. I know that was one of the requirements for the feature in 8.0 Update 1 to market GA. If that's not working for you, I'd advise you to raise an SR with support, but configuration profiles do work with auto deploy. Is there a plan to make the vCenter upgrade patching with reduced downtime more user-friendly without having to download and mount the ISO to the vCenter VM? I'm not aware of any short-term plans to enhance the user experience. I do get the point. I guess one of the gotchas with that, we want to be able to support air-gapped installations. We could have vCenter automatically download the ISO and automatically mount it to itself and do that. That's certainly doable, but we also want to maintain support for air-gapped environments where you would have to manually attach the new vCenter ISO to the vCenter VM. We need vCenter to deploy the new vCenter that's going to orchestrate the whole thing for us. But I'll give the feedback back to our product management team just to see if there's any other areas that we can use it to make it more user-friendly. I do believe they have been thinking about introducing some sort of online support where we would automatically download the new version and automatically even stage the new vCenter appliance so that all you would have to do is click that switchover button. But again, this is all, hypothetical roadmap ideas. Is lifecycle for vCenter in 8.0U3 only? No. So vCenter Reduced Downtime Update initially launched with 8 Update 1. And you can use it from 8.0 to get to 8 Update 1, or you can use it from 8.0 or 8 Update 1 all the way up to 8.U2, U3. So it's available across the board since 8 Update 1. How does partial maintenance mode work if the host is in a vSAN cluster? So there's no impact. All the demos that we actually showed here today, they're running on vSAN clusters. The VMs are running on vSAN clusters. There's absolutely no impact. You can use live patch and partial maintenance mode with vSAN. Like I said, it's supported in VCF 5.2 as well, which typically would run using vSAN. VMs with RDM disks, would fast suspend resume work for those VMs? I feel like I've had that question before and I can't remember the answer. I'm unsure. I see that was from Karen. I will try and get an answer for that and relay it back through the TAMs. Similar with the next question on multi-writer disks. I need to double check those because there are some, there might be some gotchas there around those VMs using RDMs, VMs that are using shared VMDKs. Let me double check those, Andy, if we can capture those and we can follow up with those offline.
Okay.
Is there a compatibility checks for VMs to determine whether any VMs are ineligible? So yes, even though I didn't show it, when we're in the remediation screen, you can click a little bit further into the details. You'll be able to see the list of VMs on each host. It'll tell you these are fast suspend resume capable, these ones are not. And at the end of the remediation event, the cluster will actually list, okay, here are all the VMs that were incompatible with fast suspend resume, and you need to manually remediate those by doing a manual vMotion, for example. Will live patch be possible during NSX upgrade? That is on the roadmap. I don't believe it's here right now, but it is on our plan. Can you exit partial maintenance mode through SSH? Not to my knowledge. It's a private API right now that only vSphere Lifecycle Manager can enact. Is it possible on LCM to patch a couple of selected hosts from a cluster? So yes, it is possible to patch. You can when you're remediating a cluster, you can either remediate the entire cluster or you can remediate one host at a time. So that's still how you would do it. If you wanted to have full control over the sequence, the number of hosts that you want to remediate in the cluster at any given time, you can still just individually choose one host, remediate, second host, remediate, and so on. Is there a restriction and needs to eligible for patch with version? Build number, this is only for live. Yes, so the eligibility that I talked about where you have to be on a certain build to be able to patch to a newer build, that eligibility and that restriction is only for live patching. If you're doing traditional patching, you can skip versions. You can go from 8 update 1 and skip right up to 8 update 3, for example, or later. There's a question on downgrading drivers. Yeah, that's a common one that comes up. Still no change there, unfortunately. We're not able to downgrade drivers, but I think that's something that PM has on their roadmap to drive adoption of the LCM. It's one of the blockers. Is live patch can be done if new drivers are provided for the ESXi host. So again, live patch will depend on what is the patch payload. If the patch payload is only targeting the VM execution environment, the portion of ESXi that we can live patch today, yes, we can live patch. If live patch brings in new drivers, if it touches the VM kernel subsystem, and then no, we won't be able to live patch. It will only be live patchable if it's capable. Is there an option to back out live patches? You would still use the rollback method today to roll back any live patches, similar like you would do with a traditional patching mechanism. You'd have to reboot the host, go into the alt boot bank, and you'd roll back essentially. There's another question about migrating to We can't migrate existing VUM baseline clusters to VCF to using LCM, even in 5.2. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about that question about migrating baseline based to LCM in the context of VCF. I know it does have some restrictiveness around importing environments into VCF 5.2 and migrating from one type to another. I would imagine there is a plan to address that as well, but I don't have an answer for that one, I'm afraid, Thomas. And is LivePatch compatible with OEM firmware upgrades? Again, it's not. It's only compatible with the portion of ESXi that we are capable to LivePatch today. Can LivePatch work on a standalone host? Yes, it can. Is LivePatch serial by cluster or one at a time? You can patch multiple clusters at the same time, even using LivePatch. But you can't live patch multiple hosts in the same cluster in parallel. But you can migrate, you can remediate multiple clusters in parallel. Okay, I think I don't want to eat up too much time because there's still a lot of slides to get through. So we'll come back to some questions if time allows it. If not, we can follow up offline. Okay, so hardware support, and this is great. I appreciate all the questions as well. I mentioned dual GPU support for VLCM. This is just to highlight that dual DPU support is here in vSphere 8 Update 3. And what does that mean? So it can be used in one of two ways. We can use two DPUs to perform high availability of our network offload capacity. So we have two DPUs in an active standby configuration. This allows us to protect against DPU failover or failure or loss of an uplink, where we would automatically fail over to the standby DPU. So this was a big ask by customers that are leveraging the DPU technology. The first thing they wanted was two DPUs for that redundancy. We can do that in 8 Update 3. Now, if high availability isn't your thing or redundancy, you can actually even use the two DPUs independently of each other and provide double or twice the offload capacity per host. In this configuration, both DPUs are independent of each other. There's no failover between the two. They're attached to separate NSX-backed vSphere distributed switches. And each of those switches then has their own workloads. So there's still full isolation between the two DPUs and the two switches. Now we've added some support for the latest Intel CPU generations, CPU Max series. These are a new type of CPU because they're targeted towards AI/ML workloads or high performance computing application demands. These CPUs actually have high bandwidth memory integrated into the CPU itself. So this diagram here is illustrating where we've got memory built into the CPU and a memory controller. vSphere 8 Update 3 can take advantage of these CPUs, and the workloads that are running on these hosts can take advantage of the built-in accelerators that exist within these CPUs. So it's targeting a very niche audience for these particular CPUs and these particular workloads, but it's always a welcome addition to add additional hardware capacity. And we also launched a technical preview of what we call memory tiering. You might have heard about this a couple of years ago. I think it went under the name Project Capitola and has kind of evolved over time. We would have been announced at I think it was even still called VMworld back then. Memory tiering or Project Capitola. And this allows us to create tiers of memory within our servers. So we're all familiar with RAM today or DDR RAM. It's blazing fast. But NVMe technology has become increasingly fast as well. Now, it's obviously not as fast as DDR RAM, but it can be fast enough to service a lot of workloads and act as their memory source. So we can create tiered memory pools. Almost think of it like we'd have, gold memory and silver memory, and we can assign policies to workloads to say, okay, you need the fastest memory on the host. You get the gold tier policy. So your memory, your 32 gigs of memory on your VM will run in DDR. But we might have different workloads that don't need super fast memory. They'd be happy with something slower. And those VMs would transparently have their memory stored in the NVMe storage. It would act as additional memory capacity, essentially, for the host. Something that isn't as memory intensive. So it'll allow us to leverage a lot more of the hardware and improve CPU utilization and a lower total cost of ownership, really cram even more workloads into the host themselves, because almost a lot of the times memory is the bottleneck compared to the compute. This is available as a technical preview in 8 Update 3, which means it's typically not supported for production. So we want customers to use this in a test dev sort of environment. There's a big detailed PDF about this tech preview in a KB article 95944. That will go through a lot of the requirements, the details, how to set this up as well. Okay, let's talk about GPUs. So obviously AI/ML, generative AI, it's the buzzword of 2024. They all run on GPUs, right? Well, we're not going to talk about the actual large language models or the generative AI processes here. We're just going to talk about the technology that vSphere has to support workloads that use GPUs. And the main one we have, and we've had it for quite a while, is vGPU. We've worked with NVIDIA for several years now, going back to 6.7, I believe, on vGPU technology. And when it first released, it was great. It was virtualizing the GPUs, passing that physical GPU essentially up to the virtual machine, but it was restrictive. We couldn't vMotion, we couldn't snapshot VMs. We had to have the same profile of all the VMs on the same host, but we've slowly worked out all those kinks with NVIDIA. And now we really do have a fully featured, flexible model here with virtual GPUs. You can mix and match your GPU profiles as much as you want, as long as the underlying physical GPU supports those profiles. Now, NVIDIA uses profile names like B, C, Q, depending on their use case. I'm just using kind of more friendly language, like a machine learning application, a compute application, a graphics application. In the past, if we had one VM that was tagged for graphics application profile, you had to put all the VMs on graphics application profile. That's no longer the case. You can mix and match the profile types. You can mix and match the GPU memory sizes as well. So you can really leverage the entirety of the GPU for all the different workloads that you may have. We're also exposing the media engine to vGPU profiles for the first time. Now, media engine is typically used in GPUs, and there's usually only one. Some of the higher end models might have two. And it's used primarily for video rendering. Things like the HEVC code, video codecs, things like that, X265, 264. Those video codec renderers would leverage hardware acceleration from a media engine. So we can now use those workloads and have the hardware acceleration for those workloads running in virtual machines as well. We're exposing some basic GPU consumption metrics to the vSphere client. And we actually recently just released a fling specifically for GPU metrics as well. One of the flings, I don't know the site now off the top of my head since we transitioned everything over to the Broadcom side of things. But if you Google VMware flings, you should find the site. We can see some basic GPU compute and memory here. We can see how much we've used, what our total capacity is, how many GPUs do we have in the cluster. And we can see that as well in the performance charts, but it's less of a performance chart. It's more of just of a historical consumption. We can see that our GPU consumption here has slightly crept up recently. And we can ingest a lot of this data as well into ARIA operations and trend and forecast analysis. We can see that maybe in 6 months' time, based on current trends, we may need to increase our GPU capacity, depending on how much we're currently using and the way things might be going for our workloads. We've simplified the ability to enable GPU workload mobility. DRS is now vGPU aware. That was introduced in a previous update. So DRS can make better placement decisions for your vGPU VMs. You can enable DRS automation for those GPU VMs for load balancing reasons. Now, that's always one that you want to be careful about using, because migrating a GPU-enabled VM isn't as straightforward as a non-GPU VM because of the increased stun time that we have to impart on the VM due to its using GPU CUDA calls as well. And for that, you can also configure the device stun time limit. You can configure what is the maximum stun time that you're going to allow a GPU-enabled VM to suffer. And if that stun time is more than the defined value, then that VM won't ever get migrated because it will exceed that quality of service that you've defined. Okay. I will come back to the Q&A as well, don't worry. Oh, and I see somebody has put in the fling. Thanks, James. So availability. Now, the vSphere cluster service. This is always a fun topic to talk about. Everyone's favorite 3 annoying VMs that exist on every cluster. We know they're annoying. We know they've caused pain, and we've hopefully resolved a lot of the problems that were associated with them. We've completely re-architected the vSphere cluster service feature to use CRX runtimes. Essentially, this is some of the technology, the container-based technology that we first developed for the vSphere IaaS space. So there's fewer VMs per cluster. There's only 2 VMs per cluster. The VIB is embedded into ESXi. There's no OVA push from vCenter. There's no EAM agency trying to manage where VMs need to be. There's no storage footprint. These tiny little container runtimes just run in memory. I think it's about 120 megs each of memory. But they serve the same functionality. They serve the same functionality for DRS and HA to operate optimally. So every cluster, once you upgrade to 8 update 3, you'll see it automatically transition to what we call this embedded cluster service, embedded vSphere cluster service. Those old 3 VMs will disappear, and you'll have these 2 new VMs will appear. Now, I'm going to call them VMs because that's what they will look like in the vSphere client to you. And for all intents and purposes, we can just pretend they are VMs, but under the hood, they are actually running lightweight containerized instances. You'll see them in the vSphere client as embedded vCLS in the UI. So hopefully we know that there's been a lot of problems with these VMs getting deployed, not getting deployed, going into retreat mode, coming out of retreat mode, not going onto the right storage. So hopefully a lot of those issues will completely disappear using the embedded vSphere cluster service. And that these will be completely transparent and you won't even realize that they are there. We've added some more options for fault tolerance, primarily to support stretch clusters. vSAN stretch clusters are non-vSAN stretch clusters. It's a simple checkbox when you're turning on fault tolerance to enable Metro cluster fault tolerance support. you will choose the host group for the primary, and the secondary VM will automatically go on to the opposite site. This allows for fault-tolerant VMs to span metro clusters or stretched clusters. And so the way the failover will happen here is, and the recreation of the failed VM would be if a host running the primary FTVM fails, the secondary FTVM will take over as expected. And then another host within the same site as the failed primary will recreate the failed primary. So we'll always make sure that both sites have each node of the FT cluster. We'll never actually recreate the primary or the former primary on the same site as the secondary. We'll never recreate the FT instances on the same site. We always want to keep them separate because that's the whole point of this particular feature and technology. Okay. Andy, if we're low on time, just chime in. Otherwise, I'll just keep driving on and we'll get to some questions at the end.
Yeah, we could do another 20 minutes.
Perfect. Okay, that should be good. Yeah. Okay, so just a little bit on workloads. We have a new feature here called virtualized CPU C states. This is primarily targeting those telco workloads, telco and virtualized radio access networks. Energy efficiency for those infrastructures is quite important, and it allows the guest operating system to control the CPU C states. Today, that's can only really be done by, let's say, the bare metal operating system or ESXi, and not the virtual machines. So we're exposing that to the guest operating systems. It allows the VMs then to enter CPU cores into C states or low power states. When an application or processes might be idle, they may not need all the CPUs to be fully active at this particular time. And when demand requires, obviously, we can turn them back on and get back all our full power. Now, this does require Intel Cascade Lake and newer CPUs and an Intel idle driver. That is built into Photon OS 5, and it's available asynchronously for other Linux distributions, even Photon 3 and 4, but it is built into Photon OS 5 from VMware. Something very straightforward, to be honest, I'm surprised it didn't exist, was being able to customize virtual machine hardware during an OVA deployment. You can do it when you're deploying templates, VMTX templates, cloning VMs, but for some reason, deploying OVA, OVF from content library was not available to customize the hardware in that one workflow. You had to deploy the OVF, let it deploy, then go back in the second time and customize the hardware. Now we have this option in the UI and in the APIs to customize the hardware in one workflow. So it saves you that one extra step. And a nice to have for those in the troubleshooting space. And I'm sure many of you have come across or potentially come across this issue in the past. One of the more common reasons why we sometimes had what were called disabled methods was when a particular, it was most commonly that vMotion was disabled on a virtual machine inadvertently. And this would happen if a backup vendor, for example, would go, okay, I'm going to back up this particular virtual machine. I don't want the virtual machine to move while I'm doing the backup operation. So it disables vMotion for that virtual machine. It injects a disabled method into the vCenter database table. That stops vMotion for that VM. You can see there the disabled method is called relocate VM. And the idea was that when the backup solution is completed, its task, it clears that flag. And 9 times out of 10, it would clear the flag. But I do remember working in support as well and constantly getting these cases where I right-click one virtual machine and vMotion is disabled. It was always this disabled methods flag. You had to go into the mob or go into the database and remove the flag. Now you have it in the UI. So very simple to just self-service troubleshoot. If there are other disabled methods in here, and sometimes there are disabled methods legitimately for good reason on virtual machines, but for ones that that may be lingering or maybe stale, you can re-enable those right in the UI as well. Okay, and security and compliance is going to be our last section before I dive into more questions. We've expanded our identity provider support now to ping federate. So that adds from Microsoft ADFS, Entra ID or Azure AD, and Okta. So we added those in the previous updates, and now we have ping federate as well. So we're adding, as possible, the most popular, the most requested ones from customers. So if there is one here on the list that you're, or one that's not on the list that you are using, please do share that with your TAMs. They can feed it back to product management. Now, there's another one here called VMware SSO, and this kind of one flew under the radar a little bit. And this is different to vCenter SSO. So VMware SSO is essentially a mechanism to leverage identity federation through vCenter without using enhanced linked mode. So the way that would work is let's say you would have vCenter A. vCenter A is connected to our Okta instance, and that's our identity provider. And we have vCenter B and we have vCenter C, but they're not in enhanced linked mode. And we don't want to join every vCenter to Okta. So what we can do is we can use this VMware SSO capability. And we essentially use that vCenter A, that first vCenter, to act as the identity provider for the other vCenters. So we would connect our vCenter B or vCenter C through this wizard, connect them to vCenter A. It's not enhanced linked mode. It's using the vCenter as an identity provider, and in a pass-through fashion will allow for identity federation to the other vCenters. We're making it easier to manage TLS ciphers. This becomes more and more common, as well as older ciphers and protocols start to get deprecated by various security authorities and security professionals. Today, or before today, you had to dig around in config files and KB articles. We're introducing TLS profiles. So it allows you to apply a standardized profile that will disable or enable only the TLS profiles and ciphers that you want, that is outlined by specific profile and specific security organizations. So right now there's one profile out of the box called NIST 2024, which conforms to the NIST security configuration recommendations to very easily apply that. And it tells you what cipher list and what cipher suite that it will only allow. And with that, there's also some guidance around the TLS profiles in the vSphere Security Configuration Guide, which I believe should be out now on 8 Update 3. I know it wasn't there initially, but should be available there now. And it also includes guidance on vSAN for the first time. So vSAN is, so well integrated into vSphere, there's no point in having it as a separate security configuration. Everything that you're doing in terms of security at vCenter and ESXi is going to impact vSAN as well. So it made sense to merge the two guidance together. It also has the guidance around the TLS profiles, some guidance around VM boot options, STIG guidance, PCI DSS guidance. All that usual stuff is updated, and new scripts to help remediate those and audit those as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the questions. I think we have 10 minutes. Let's see if I can scrub through some more of these questions. Okay, so from image-based updates, is mixed vendor hardware supported in a single cluster, for example, Dell and HP servers? Not today, it's not supported, but that is definitely something that product management is aware of, and we're looking to solve that in future releases as well. Will UMDS for VC8U3 support VCU2 servers as well? As far as I know, UMDS is backwards compatible. So you could have one UMDS that's able to go backwards. So if it's 8U3, it can service 8U2, 8U1. As far as I know, that is true. I can check the documentation. It seems many of the new widgets do not support ELM, such as fast vCenter patching. Is ELM pre-deprecated? That's a good term. I'm going to have to use that one. Reduced downtime update should support ELM now in 8U3. That wasn't there in previous releases. I'm not going to comment on is ELM pre-deprecated, even though I do like that term. I would recommend. I do tend to not recommend ELM, just from a historical perspective. There can be a lot of management issues with ELM, with replication going out of sync with the VMDir databases behind the scenes. I've always tried to steer customers away from ELM for manual releases, to be honest, just because it can tend to cause more headaches than value that it can provide. The single pane of glass is nice, but sometimes it can come at a cost. With reduced downtime upgrade vCenter, would there be an option to customize the newly deployed, like a second NIC, or is this handled automatically? So when we're doing a reduced downtime upgrade, you do get to slightly customize the destination vCenter if you choose, but only so far as the t-shirt sizing, the small, medium, large. You don't get the option to add a second NIC or add any additional disks outside of the standard configuration. The only, I suppose, outlier to that would be vCenter HA. When we're doing a vCenter HA upgrade using reduced downtime upgrade, it orchestrates the adding of the second NIC and orchestrates the reconfiguration of vCenter HA for you. But currently, no, you can't deeply customize the vCenter VM, because we do want to try and maintain the same source and destination. Okay, a question on partial maintenance mode. If the VMs do not support, how can we do vMotion as it's not supported to and from migration to the host? Okay, so what will happen during a live patch, and we've got VMs that are not fast suspend resume compatible, is the host will enter partial maintenance mode. The host will get patched. The host will exit partial maintenance mode. The VMs won't fast suspend resume, and we'll continue. We will do the rest of the cluster. Then at the end of the remediation event of the entire cluster, you'll be presented with the list of, here are the VMs that need to be manually remediated or manually vMotioned to complete that. So you do that vMotion at the end once the hosts have been patched and all the hosts have been exited of partial maintenance mode. And it's not something that you have to do, I suppose, strictly immediately. It's advised to do it as quickly as possible. We don't want to have those 2 mount revisions that I showed kind of lingering for too long. So that would be the recommendation there. Okay, there's a question about current vCenter still on 7U3 and the team is looking to upgrade to 8U3. What's the easiest recommended path? Upgrade the existing vCenter or create a new one and replace the old? So this is a question as old as time. Do we upgrade our vCenter in place, or do we do a new vCenter and migrate everything across? And if you had asked me this a couple of years ago, I would have said I would have leaned towards new vCenter and start fresh. But the way vCenter upgrades happen today, anyways, it's almost like a fresh start. Especially when you're doing that major upgrade from 7 to 8, you can choose to copy all the data across, all the historical data, all the tasks and events history, or you can just copy across the core inventory and configuration. And if you choose to just copy across the core configuration and inventory, that's essentially like starting with a new vCenter and recreating your clusters. It is almost as clean as doing that. So that would be my recommendation. If you're concerned about a bloated vCenter 7 that you may or may want to move away from, if you do the upgrade and not choose to migrate the historical performance chart information or the tasks and events, you're leaving all that bloat behind. And you're not having to go through the work of recreating clusters, distributed switches, and things like that. So that would be my recommendation. Do the GPU metrics only show for vGPU or for pass-through only? That is a good question that I don't know the answer to, as I've only seen it in a vGPU capacity, but I may need to check if it also shows for pass-through. And why is the CPU feature to set the sleep not added in the VMware tools and need an Intel driver? So that's on the C-state technology. So the driver needs to be an Intel driver because it's an Intel technology for us to be able to interact with those Cascade Lake or newer CPUs and put those cores into a sleep state. I guess there isn't any reason why we can't package that Intel driver with VMware tools, but it could be there could be a political reason there around us packaging a third-party driver as well. I don't really have a good answer for that, but it does need to be an Intel driver because it's an Intel technology. Is there a limit to the number of connected vCenters using ping? That would be a limit coming from ping. We'd have to ask Ping or Okta or any of the identity providers if there's a limit of the number of vCenters that they support. I'd imagine there is a max number of applications that can be integrated with a particular identity provider, but I can't imagine that limit is anything low. Even in our Broadcom Okta instance here, we've got hundreds and hundreds of applications all linked together. See. Regarding cluster images, if we have hundreds of cluster in a vCenter, is there a way to manage from a higher level like vCenter to configure, automate, and schedule multi-clusters to patch? There was with vSphere Plus, but we've end-of-lifed that service realistically. This is something that PM is also very aware of, and it's something that I've personally been asking them for because I know it's great to be able to manage 1, 2, 3 clusters individually, but when you get into the hundreds of clusters, you do want to be able to set a global image for clusters, or have a couple of different images depending on your infrastructure, and being able to manage all that at a vCenter level is definitely something that they are investigating, and it might be something that we may need to work with the likes of the VCF operations side as well to help orchestrate. And VCSA and other Photon appliances are currently running OpenSSH version blah currently.
Feidhlim, I've got a little bit of information about this from what I've seen, that certain security scanners, they have acknowledged that there's an issue with false detections related to this. This was actually resolved in U2B.
Okay.
And so it's being addressed with those. I'm not going to call out a specific name, but this was resolved in U2B.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Yeah, I'm not intimately familiar. I've seen this question kind of pop up internally a few times, and I know our security team have answered it something along the lines of, it is fixed. There are false positives out there and stuff like that. So that's good. Um, so yeah, there's just those last two questions there that I don't know the answer to right now, but hopefully we'll be able to follow up and get answers to them. But that is it. Hopefully, I didn't go too long.
You
I
came
think
to
we
the
had
wire, man.
came to
You
the
did
wire.
it.
Okay.
You handled this content and this barrage of QAs like a champ today. Feidhlim, thanks so much for sharing your time, your knowledge with our TAM customers. We appreciate it a ton.
No, and thank you to the customers as well. All those questions was fantastic. I love giving presentations where I'm inundated with questions because it just
Right.
makes it much more interesting, and I'm not just droning on my own
Yeah, it's
my own
better than
script.
wondering if you're on mute or something, right?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, folks, and thanks for hanging with us too. A bunch of you today. This might be one of our highest attended, so we're really grateful to have all of you and hanging in there so long. As a reminder, our next webinar is September 15th. Again, they're always on Thursdays at the same time slot, and the topic will be similar to this one in terms of what's new, but with the product focus on ARIA Operations 8.18. So watch for the invite from your TAM. Again, the TAMs will be getting you the link to this recording directly. It's private for a few months, and then we make it public on our YouTube channel. So be looking for that. Thanks so much for joining. Have a great day.